Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Today is Wednesday, September the 23rd, and today we're just going to talk a little bit about the Greek gods, primarily. Yes, hope I don't make you dizzy there. But yes, the Greek gods. Early Greek philosophy, art centers around a complex theater of gods who are anthropomorphic. I like big words. That means they have human qualities. And by human qualities, it means that they were not necessarily moral. They were jealous, they were petty, they were vengeful, they were, uh, in fact, many of the worst qualities of human beings, uh, these Greek gods had. And so they were lustful. Zeus, for example, it's very common for Zeus to come to Earth and assume the form of some. And by the way, Zeus is the father of the gods. Yeah, to assume the form of something pleasant, just so he could basically have sex with human with a human female. He did that. So, in fact, Zeus's sons were Perseus, Hercules, these demigods. A demigod is not a god, but they're like part man, part god. For example, Thor is considered a demigod. Few Marvel comic book fans, so you know, part not quite a god, but also more than a man, like Babe Ruth. I'm just kidding. Anyway, having human qualities who often intervene in the acts of mankind on Earth. These gods included Saturn. Saturn, and if you notice this list of gods here, you say, wait a minute, I've seen those names before. There are names that I've seen in astronomy class, or the names of the planets, for example. Well, to be real honest, most of the planets have the names of the constellations, have the names of Greek gods, and many of the formation of stars, Orion's belt, for example. So, Saturn. Saturn was a god who ate his own children, for what that's worth. But now the most famous of the gods is Zeus. If you notice, some of the gods actually have two names. One is the Roman name, as in the case of Jupiter. Jupiter is his Roman name. Zeus is the Greek name, and Zeus was the father of the gods. Threw down lightning bolts from heaven, that kind of thing. But yes, and like I said, he was one who was given to dress or disguising himself as different creatures and coming on Earth for the purpose of having sex, to be honest, and other things. Yes, speaking of having sex, here we have Venus, also called Aphrodite. She's everybody said, oh, Venus is the goddess of love. Venus god of having sex. Yeah, lust, those things. You have to remember that the ancient Greeks and Romans were hedonistic. They weren't put off by immoral acts the way people are in Judeo-Christian Muslim societies, like you find in the United States and Europe and Islamic countries. Anyway, so yeah, Venus, also called Aphrodite. Apollo, he was the patron god of the Greeks, because the Greeks called themselves the people of the sun. His other name, Hellas. Yes, Apollo was the god of the sun. Apollo, according to the Greeks, rode across the skies every day in a chariot. That chariot, that's the sun. Yeah. Anyway, Mars, um, also called Ares, the god of war. Let's put that there. Yes, the god of war. God of war, that's what he does. Also of civil order. Mercury, the messenger of the gods, and a lot of these gods had various roles. For example, if you were to go to go to if you were to go to the Union Terminal over in Cincinnati, Union Terminal in Cincinnati has two gods, two Greek gods that are, I mean, they're like 30 feet tall, etched into the limestone facing of Union Terminal. One is Hermes, because, yes, not only is he messenger of the gods, he is also the god of speed, of movement. Yes. Then there is Neptune, the god of the sea, also called Poseidon. And by the way, Poseidon, um, as you saw there, his weapon was a trident. But did you notice, if you watch that little clip that I sent you, it only lasts 7 minutes. If you watch that little clip that I sent you, that he traveled around on dolphins or horses. And I say that comes into play later on. You know, one of the things we're going to actually look at a Hollywood movie during this class, the Troy, the one with Brad Pitt. Yeah. And one of the things that made Poseidon angry was at the Greeks, was that when they conquered Troy by using the Trojan horse, we're going to go over all that, by using the Trojan horse and putting those Greek soldiers in the horse, and then the Trojans pulled the horse into the city of Troy, was it made Poseidon, offended Poseidon, that the Greeks had used his animal. I mean, each of the gods had animals. For example, um, Athena, her god, her animal was the owl, symbol of wisdom. Zeus, his animal was the eagle. But that the Greeks had used Poseidon's or Neptune's animal, the horse, in a deception. Pluto, also is also called Hades. He is the god of the underworld, brother of Zeus and god of the underworld. He walks around with a three-headed dog uh, called Cerberus. Yes, the guardian of the gates of Hades. And by the way, to get to Hades, you had to cross the river Styx, Styx. Yes, and to get across the river Styx, you had to pay the tillerman. Well, not that, I mean, when the Greeks believed that when you died, you went into the underworld and you had to pay the teller. Anyway, and we're going to see that later on. So, Athena, as mentioned before, was the goddess of wisdom. She is also the of patron goddess of Athens. You know, a lot of times, a lot of the different Greek cities had different gods and goddesses as their patron. Well, the city of Athens obviously was Athena. The city of Sparta was Mars. And so, yes, now Hera was both the sister, as you saw in the film, the sister and the wife of Zeus. Yeah, Greeks and Romans, and to be honest, the Egyptians did not look askance at marrying very close relatives. In fact, in ancient Egypt, it was very common for brothers and sisters to be married so that the offspring could be of a pure blood. Anyway, Bacchus, as you saw in the film, Bacchus is the god of wine and partying. In fact, one of the things that comes out of Greece is theater plays. And we'll mention this later on. Any film that you watch right now, any play, any movie, television show, is probably a rehashing of a Greek drama and or comedy. And for that, you can thank Bacchus, because the theater plays were created in a festival to honor the god Bacchus. And we'll talk more about Greek plays later on, but yeah, some of the things they did, like having comic relief, having special effects, having makeup, all done by the Greeks. And you have to remember that they were done on live stages, and they were done with the idea in mind that, the audience is probably drunk. And so we have to be careful not to get the audience too riled up in the play, because, all the audiences have to do is climb up on stage, which happened from time to time. Yes, this thing called the unknown god. The unknown god, and I may have mentioned this before. In the city of Athens, if you read the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, in his letter to the Athenians, the Apostle Paul visited Athens, and he is there a letter to the Athenians, or is it in Corinthians? Anyway, he visited the city of Athens, and the first thing you notice is that there's a temple to every god. And the Greeks were so superstitious that perhaps they had forgotten a god, perhaps they had, somehow not honored God, that they created another temple to the unknown god. Yes, who were the Titans? The Titans were people who existed, not people, but beings who existed prior to the gods. The gods defeated them and cast them into the underworld, most of them. The Medusa was a Titan. The Medusa, the woman with the snakes in her hair that was supposed to be so frightening looking that she, if you looked at her, she would turn to stone. Yeah. Or the Kraken, a giant sea monster, was considered a Titan. And they waged war with the gods until the gods finally drove them out. Zeus finally drove them out. Okay, the Oracle at Delphi. The Oracle at Delphi, why do I think I've said this before? The Oracle at Delphi was a way of telling the future. If a leader or someone wanted to make a decision, wanted to get the advice of the gods, he would consult the Oracle at Delphi. And the Oracle was a priest, several priests, and they kept these young girls. The story was they were virgins, according to tradition, and they kept them in a fairly drugged condition, and they would have them breathe in some very noxious fumes as well as their drugged condition. And then they would ask these young women questions. And of course, the girls would babble, make incoherent noises. And the oracle would interpret what they said and relay that to the person asking the question. For example, the king of Lydia posed the question to the oracle that whether or not should I fight the Persians. The Persians were this invading army and King of Lydia said, should we put up a fight or should we just surrender? And the oracle said, well, if you go to war, a king will fall. Now, see, that's really ambivalent. And yeah, a king's going to fall, King of Lydia. Of course, King of Lydia didn't realize that. He thought it was the other guy. So, but yeah, the Pool of Apollo was another place for consultation of the gods. It was located near Mount Olympus, and trust me, I don't even know. Ah, yes, Tantalus. Tantalus was a person who was punished by the gods. He was a human being. He had committed some offense to the gods, and so the gods punished him, not by killing him, but by letting him live. And he was chained. Tantalus was chained at the base of a tree, standing waist deep in water. He couldn't go anywhere, and there was a tree over his head. And on this tree, there was beautiful fruit hanging down from it, and it was hanging right over Tantalus's head. And Tantalus would be hungry, and he would reach up to try and take one piece of the fruit. And just as he was about to reach it, the branch would snap back and just keep the fruit out of his grasp. And then when Tantalus lowered his arm again, the fruit lowered again. Now, when Tantalus was thirsty, the water hit was waist deep, so he dipped down to drink it. And guess what the water did? It receded just out of his reach. And that's just it. He lived. He was forced to live like that. But from that, Tantalus, please tell me you've heard of the word to tantalize. To tantalize means to hold something in front of somebody's face and then at the last moment do that. It's a cruel thing to do. How do I know? Because when I was 6 years old, I grew up on a farm. When I was 6 years old, we had cattle on our farm, and we had, we fed the cows a variety of things, corn, sweet feed, but cows like to eat the dried husk of corn. They like it. And so every evening we'd go to feed the cattle. And now where we kept all this grain was in what we called a crib. And the crib was elevated off the ground. It was about 4 feet, maybe 3 feet. Yeah, 3 feet off the ground. I was 6 years old. It seemed like a mile off the ground. 3 feet off the ground, and had a door that opened to the outside, and there was corn stored in the crib, and we would shuck the corn and put the corn into the sheller to make food for the chickens and pigs. But the corn shucks, the husk, we would feed the cows. Well, there were 2 cows that I remember. One was named Mitzi, and Mitzi was a nice Holstein, didn't have horns, and was nice and temperate. Then there was an Ayrshire heifer called Lucy. We called her Lucy after Lucille Ball. I didn't like Lucy. Lucy was Ayrshire. She had these horns that went out and up. And she had a wicked temper, and I didn't like her. And so when Mitzi came up, I would feed Mitzi the corn shucks, put it in her mouth. I was a little kid. I liked it. When Lucy came up with her horns, I would extend the shuck to her, and when she reached for it, I'd pull it back and think it was funny. And then I did it a couple of times, and she got mad, and she swung her head at me, and she caught me with those horns right up under my shirt. I mean, she got her horn. I was hooked. The horn didn't enter my skin, although cows can do that to you. It got up under my shirt, and then she starts taking off. Well, I'm with her. I'm hanging off her horn, 6 years old, and she runs about 50 feet with me hanging off the end of her horn. And I dropped off and she kept running. But yeah, that's what it means to tantalize. And that's why it's not nice. And with that, we're going to pick up with part D tomorrow. And we're going to talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey, because those are great stories. Yeah. And I should have reversed that. It's the Odyssey and the Iliad. And from time to time, we'll introduce other characters of Greek mythology. And so I think that's good for today. Have a good day, guys.